Hey, I'm Rachael.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
She's currently the only woman premier in Canada, but the Honourable Danielle Smith has a long history being involved in politics. A former school trustee and former leader of the opposition, Premier Smith has spent a lot of time working in media as well, including years as a talk show radio host. The Honourable Danielle Smith is here with us today. Welcome. It is such a pleasure to have you. I don't know if you know this, but you are our first sitting politician on the podcast we've ever had. We want to just dive into your story and your experience now leading the province of Alberta. And we are so thrilled to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, we're going to dive in quickly. We want to get straight to it, okay? We want to know who you are. So the Globe and Mail described you as a libertarian. Politico has described you as a populist conservative. And the New York Times described you as far right. How do you describe you?
I describe myself as a libertarian conservative because there are different strains in the libertarian movement because I love freedom. I believe in the dignity and rights of the individual, but I also know that the individual thrives when they are supported by family, when they're supported by a fellowship of community, often a faith community. I also see that a lot of individuals are able to excel when in free enterprise, and then when they succeed, they also give back to the community through philanthropy. And so that's why my values are very much in sync with the conservative side of the political spectrum. But it really is foundational about human flourishment and individual flourishment is my foundational principle.
Mm. So for context, we have a lot of women who listen to our podcast, a lot of men too, but a lot of women and a lot of women who are interested, particularly in women who decide to run. And not only did you decide to run, but you're leading a province, an enormous role. What are some of the principles that you govern by, to give context to people who are listening in, who may be just getting to know you for the first time?
Yeah, well, I talked a bit about my values, and I think I think that says a lot about some of the things that I look for when I'm identifying areas of policy that I need to address.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I find very important. I was a leader before when in opposition. Now I'm a leader in government, and you learn a lot the first time around. So one of the things that I've learned is, as leader, your job is to really be the cheerleader in chief for so many things, for not only your province and principal industry, which I am, but also for my ministerial colleagues who are amazing and doing incredible work, as well as my caucus colleagues who I think have done a tremendous job of identifying important issues that we need to elevate. And so for me, I believe that I don't succeed if I don't have a strong team behind me. And so I've spent a lot of time on that relationship building. And I also spend a lot of time giving direction to my ministers and just allowing them to be able to run with it, because I do believe that there can be more than one leader in a caucus and cabinet. And in fact, you're stronger as a team when you allow for everybody to have their own areas that they can move forward on.
I want to go back a little bit because you are such an incredible example of a woman who has held multiple leadership roles, multiple elected roles throughout your history. We have a lot of women that maybe have heard about you through headlines or are watching some of your announcements. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about your journey to the Premier's office? How did you get there? How did you decide politics was your thing? And what would you say to them if they want to get to know you a little bit better?
Well, I guess I like to be in charge. Maybe that's part of what is in common. And if you look at all of the different jobs that I've had, is that I've always wanted to enter at the top. So when I got into politics, I became president of the campus club at the University of Calgary for the Progressive Conservatives, and then went on to be an intern after I finished my economics degree, but came back as the managing director of the Canadian Property Rights Research Institute, then ran for school board, which was also a leadership position when I was 27 years old, and then joined the Herald editorial board as an editorial writer and columnist, which is kind of one of the top positions at a newspaper newspaper and shaping the
Yeah.
view of the paper, and then became the Alberta director of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business and managed 2 offices. Then ran for the leader of the Wild Rose Party, and then came back as a radio host, which is essentially having my own show
Right.
for 6 years. And then became the president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. And then when I got back into politics, of course, ran for the leader of the UCP. So for me, because I have always had very strong ideas about what it is I wanted to accomplish, I have a very strong policy base. I've been studying public policy, and in particular, Alberta public policy, going back all the way to 1992. Wow. That I think has demonstrated. I've tried different ways of being able to advance the policy ideas that I feel most strongly about. And always being in a leadership position to be able to do that has been important to me. So now I have an opportunity to implement the things that I've been talking about for a number of decades.
But what are you going to do when you retire?
I worry about that, frankly. I guess I'll boss my husband around.
That sounds fun.
Sounds like it. Anyway, when you were a kid, was like little Danielle somebody who thought so far ahead to think, I might run a province one day?
No, I would say that I was a bit more of I was a bit quieter when I was a kid. I was always very bookish and a bit of a teacher's pet. I hate to say it, but very, very academic oriented. So I had teachers who said, well, was good at both math and English. And so one of my teachers suggested I get an English degree, which I did. And then I wanted to take some time off to figure out what I wanted to do next. And that I had just begun to discover politics when I finished my English degree, took a year off after being involved in the provincial leadership race, federal leadership race, as well as provincial campaign, federal campaign. And I think that was really where I got my bug. And I thought, I'm not going to get where I want to with just an English degree. So I went back to school, got my economics degree, and then really got my start in public policy at the Fraser Institute as an intern. So I would say a lot of my current thinking and drive probably came in that gap year that I had between my 2 degrees.
I want to dive into policy, because the policy making, not specific policies, because you are such a strong policy maker. And I was listening to Christy Clark, who was the former Premier of British Columbia, on another podcast. And she said something. I was on the treadmill listening to this, and I stopped for a second because I thought it was a really interesting point. She said, when I was premier, I would have all of these big ideas and people thought they couldn't be done. And she actually referenced you as having a lot of big ideas that people challenge constantly. I wonder if you can talk to us about that from your perspective and what those big ideas are. Like, what is your goal for Alberta?
Well, I'd say a few things about that. Part of what has shaped my interest in public policy is just the roles that I've taken on. And so because of my economics background, I was always breaking down budgets each year to understand what decisions government was making, how they got made. But as a property rights advocate, I have a really solid understanding of property rights, which are not in our Constitution, and why that might be, and what implications that have had. I've done advocacy with our agriculture producers in those early years. I have a long history of understanding oil and gas, as well as the liabilities issues. Many of the research papers I wrote were on the environment as well. My first paper was Environmental Indicators for Canada and the US. Another one was a small business perspective on the environment. I've written on endangered species. So I come at politics from an environmental perspective, understanding that yes, we would need to develop, but we also have to do so in a responsible way. So there's always been that in the background. When it comes to communicating messages, I think I learned a lot when I was on radio, because what I discovered is I have a pretty strong worldview, going back to the values I talked about at the beginning, but I'm not always right. I mean, I always have an idea of where I want to go, but my view is you've got to test them. You've got to talk to people who agree with you and disagree with you to see if there's anything you need to modify along the way. And then that'll, I think, help with the implementation. But in politics, you have to be able to have bold ideas to get people talking about them, because it's by talking about them that you get the buy-in and you get the license to go ahead and do it. And what I've observed is that you come up with a big, bold idea, and because it's new and different, the immediate reaction is, oh my goodness, what are you doing? You can't do that. And then the second reaction is, well, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this. And then the good analysis takes place. And by the time you get to the third reaction, you have an idea of whether or not you're going to get broad-based acceptance of where you want to go, or whether or not there's a lot of pushback to it. So I understand the emotional process people have to go through when they see a bold idea. And I think that's part of what causes timidity in some political leaders, is that the first reaction is almost always going to be the critics. And you have to be able to wait that through before you can have that thoughtful analysis. And it's worth it. It's worth it to go through that process. And so I don't get too phased by some of the initial critique that comes out. I just feel that's part of the process. When I was in school, I took a philosophy course, and they talked about the practice of philosophy is really it was the Hegelian dialectic, where you have a thesis, a counter thesis, they come together and smash together, and then you get a new thesis, and then you actually have a better understanding for that process. So I have a very, very high level of comfort with conflict. Maybe that makes me a little bit unusual as a political leader, but also perhaps as a woman as a political leader. Yeah. And if you can accept that criticism is a way to make your ideas better, it allows you not to internalize it.
Do you think women get have a harder time in leadership positions when it comes to bold ideas? Do you think it's a biased thing?
I don't know if anyone who decides to come forward with bold ideas is going to end up having to withstand some of the critique on it. I've been fortunate. Maybe it's because I've been in roles where I have always had critique. When you think about being when I was in politics the first time in my early 20s, tons of critique. And then I went on the Herald editorial board, and the letters to the editor, you had people always calling, writing in, telling you were an idiot. This is before social media. So maybe I became a bit desensitized to it. Maybe that's the difference, is that it's really maybe more of a personality type. Either you can be comfortable with criticism and learn and grow from it, or you avoid it at all costs because it's too hurtful to your ego. And so I think those would be the two camps of politicians. I don't know if men or women fall disproportionately or in one versus the other. But if you do want to get into politics, you have to be able to hear your critics out.
You said something that I think is really interesting. You said, I'm not always right. And I think that's hard, or at least in this environment, it's often difficult for a politician to admit that they're wrong. Because that comes with its own share of criticism. Is there an example where you have had to say, you know what, I was wrong? Or you've had to backtrack on something that you were really, really passionate about?
I would say that when I first ran for leadership, there were three big things that I wanted to do. One was to put in the Alberta Sovereignty Act. The other was to dismantle Alberta Health Services and reform healthcare. And the third one was that I wanted to amend our human rights code to protect those who had been vaccinated or unvaccinated. And strangely enough, the reform of healthcare has been the easiest one to do. With the Alberta Sovereignty Act, I had a lot of work to do with my caucus to let them understand that it really was just affirming that we wanted to do what was in the Constitution already. So the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act went part of the way of doing that. And then just replicating the language that we have in our foundational documents. So there was some modifications I had to make there. The last one I had to drop altogether because it was not the right approach. And so the right approach was to get Preston Manning to look at a panel and to get a panel together, talk to medical experts, and just give us advice on what we might do in the next pandemic, so that we didn't have to do some of the draconian measures and we were able to protect choice. So I would say that those are three examples. Sometimes you put bold ideas forward and you can implement them as you expected to. Sometimes you have to modify them a bit to bring people on side. And sometimes you have to drop them all together and change course. And so I put those three forward because that's sort of how I restarted my political career. But I don't win every battle in caucus. I don't win every battle in cabinet. I have my process when I go through and write my mandate letters is I say, these are the things I'd like you to do. And then my minister says, well, these are the things I want to do. And then it's a bit of a collaboration on identifying the priorities. And I just think once again, you just get better solutions when you're collaborative that way, is what I have found.
So our listeners know that my great love is the separation of powers, the division of powers. You are somebody that I talk about on TV a lot because you are pushing the boundaries on defining the role of provinces within our federal federation. I wonder if you can just talk about that and what your end goal is when it comes to the role of Alberta in the federation that is Canada.
I would say this has been one of the great interests that I have had ever
Mm,
since I was a property rights advocate and discovered the machinations that happened about excluding what I think is a really foundational right from our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Because really, property is just an extension of our life's work and our life's
mhm,
energy. And if you don't own the product of your life's work and your life energy, that can really undermine your ability to live to live a full and prosperous life. So I've always been very interested on why that happened. So I've spent a lot of time looking at our Constitution, looking at our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I also had a conference that I did with one of my mentors, Link Byfield, way back before I was in politics, even the first time. And we looked at the way in which the federal government circumvents the Constitution. One is through the courts, because the courts are constantly now creating new policy and then
mhm,
expecting the provinces to enact it. So it's not the conversation I think it was supposed to be. The
mm,
conversation was that there's supposed to be politicians passing laws, the court saying, you got to modify it a bit. The politicians coming back and saying, okay, well, here's how we're going to modify it. Oftentimes, the court is seen to be the last word. And so I'm gonna push the envelope on that a little bit because I think they've overstepped in some ways.
mm,
The other area is the Senate. The Senate was supposed to be the protector of provincial interests. I mean, it's appointed provincially, but it's because by province we've got 6 seats. But I think in itself shows the problem. New Brunswick and Nova Scotia each have 10 seats.
mhm,
PEI has 4 seats. Newfoundland and Labrador also has 6 seats. So the entire Atlantic Canadian region has more Senate seats than we do in the entire Western Canada. And
mhm.
Alberta, with 4 times the population of 2 of those provinces, have fewer Senate seats. So it's I think you'll see that's part of the reason why conservatives traditionally have said we need Senate reform, is so that we can get some at least regional balance, if not actual provincial balance. And then the third one was the federal spending power. And that's the one I
Mm,
have found I spend an awful lot of time on, because the way in which the federal government undermines our Constitution is that they announce some grand scheme that they want to implement that is not in their area of jurisdiction, dangle some money in front of the politicians. The politicians say yes, and in exchange for taking a fraction of the money it's going to cost to run the program, we give over all the power to manage and create the parameters for the program to the federal government. And I've just said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. If we want to engage in cooperative federalism,
mhm,
then you come to us and work with us on our implementation of the program, and you can get the credit for helping to expand our existing school lunch program, or expand our existing pharmacare program, or expanding our existing dental coverage program, or expanding our existing long-term care program. So
mhm.
that I think has been one of the big challenges that I have had and other provinces have had, quite frankly, is that the federal government gets all this credit because it sounds like they're announcing these extraordinary transformational schemes, but they only come forward with a tiny fraction that will never achieve the goal. And then we are the ones who look like the bad guys if we say cheapers. Like this just can't be done on that budget. It can't be done in that way. But someone's got to say it. I mean, I live in the real world, and I'm not going to pretend that that the programs that are being offered are anywhere close to achieving the target that they say, and they can't be achieved unless there's some collaboration.
Can I just clarify? Because first of all, I could talk to you about that for 7 days, no problem. I'll fly to Alberta. I'll fly to Edmonton. We'll have a chat. But a lot of people think that that's based on the current prime minister or the person who could be prime minister, the personalities. But really,
Mm.
what you're talking about is the actual constitutional issue, these foundational problems. So, would you say it's fair that you have an issue with the makeup of Canada, the way our federation functions, more so than who's in power at the current time?
Well, this is going to be the case regardless of
Mm,
who sits in the prime minister chair, because I think maybe in a rare moment of honesty, the prime minister said he finds his job a little bit boring sometimes, and maybe that's part of the reason he keeps interfering in provincial jurisdiction. Maybe the federal heads of power are kind of boring because you have to manage the money supply, and you've got to print currency, and you've got to do a lot of international diplomacy and defense spending. And those are not the things necessarily that animate this prime minister. The things that really matter to people are the services to individuals, and the services that are being provided at the provincial level. So I would say that you're probably always going to have this federal encroachment on provincial jurisdiction. But it's bizarre when you think about it, because if I started going around and saying I'm establishing a militia or military installations, or if I went around saying that I was going to start negotiating trade deals, or I was going to create my own currency, everybody would say, whoa, 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 you can't do that. That's federal jurisdiction. So everybody knows it doesn't go the other way. Provinces are never establishing spending programs so that they can take over federal area of jurisdiction. So why does the federal government feel that they should do the same? And so I don't think that is how our confederation is supposed to work. Quebec has always known that is not how confederation is supposed to work. And so we're just aligning our approach to be a lot more like Quebec's approach.
We only have a couple minutes left, but one of the things that I really wanted to ask you about was political discourse. And, I think we can all agree that it's gotten a little nastier, a little uglier. You have been somebody who has been maybe accused of picking fights with the feds. And you're online, so you know what the trolls are saying back and forth. How do you deal with this kind of, you said yourself on this podcast that you're willing to fight for what you want, and you have a tough shell in order to deal with some of the criticism that comes in. But we hear a lot from our listeners. It's so ugly out there that I don't even want to tune in. I want to tune out. So how do you balance those two things? Sometimes needing to pick a fight, but also not wanting to turn off the very people that you want to engage.
I always start with trying to find common ground. My very first conversation with the prime minister was to tell him I was aligning around his target of being carbon neutral by 2050. And I said, give me time to work with my caucus and my cabinet and my members and bring Albertans on board. And I'll produce an emissions reduction and energy development plan, and we can work together on this, which I did in April. And there have been some areas we've been able to work together. We've been able to work together on a net zero project for Dow Chemicals, which is going to create net zero plastics. We've been able to work together on Heidelberg, which is going to be net zero cement, which is going to be amazing, since cement is the second most traded commodity in the world. For it to be emissions free is going to be extraordinary in the construction industry. We work together on net zero hydrogen. Hydrogen is going to be the base of fuel to build out in the Alberta economy. We're already a large producer of it. And we're just beginning the rollout of our fueling stations, supporting hydrogen buses, supporting hydrogen long-haul vehicles. We worked together on the health accord. We signed a 10-year health agreement with 4 bilateral agreements, went very smoothly. We've worked together on the childcare deal. We have to make some amendments to it, and they're working collaboratively with us. So there are lots of places where we have demonstrated that collaborative federalism can work. But when they try to come into our market and circumvent us, going around to municipalities, or work against our interests with things like emissions caps, you bet I'm going to stand up and say, no, it's not the way to go. So I am always reaching my hand out, trying to be in partnership. And I've just encouraged the federal government to do the same, because when they have, I think we've been able to work together very well. But I won't be walked over. I won't acquiesce just because the federal government has a strategy they want to do, when I know it's going to be harmful to my people, when I know it's going to be harmful to our province. There's certain things that are hard lines. I don't want to fight about every little thing, but I will fight about the big things.
Do you think online, especially, that the discourse has changed? Like, you've been in politics a long time. Do you think that it has gotten uglier and nastier, more difficult to communicate? Do you think that the discourse can be improved to engage more women in particular? It's the thing we hear over and over again on this podcast. It's just, I don't know, I'm tuning out because it's too much. Yeah. I'm curious because you're in the role. So a lot of it is directed right at you. And maybe you can have a tough shell and say, it doesn't affect me. But would you agree that things have moved in that sort of nastier direction?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, I said I was on the Herald editorial board. So from time to time, when the regular letters editor wasn't in the chair, I would do the letters editing. And what I've realized is social media is basically one large unedited letters to the editor section.
Totally.
And, and not everything used to get into the paper because some of it was, woohoo, this is, out there, or this is ignorant or whatever. We always had to edit them so that the person can get their view across without turning off the rest of our readers. But that doesn't happen in the social media realm. I'm glad that, the new version of Twitter X is taking a more aggressive stand against getting rid of the bots, because I think the bots are one of the problems.
Yes.
There are state actors, as we know. I'm not saying anything out of school. We all know that there are bot farms of actors that are not interested in promoting a peace and harmony in our country, and so they magnify some of the discord just to be able to create that social tension. I think we have to be mindful of that there is an aggressive campaign from time to time on issues for that to happen. But I think all we can really control is how we communicate online. And that's what I have always tried to do. I will take a tough position on issues, but I try not to use personal insults. I try to keep my tone moderate. I try to find common ground. And I think if everybody approached their interactions online with that spirit, that look, we can fight over issues and find out the reason why, but let's see if we can find some area where we can agree so that we know where the points of departure are. I think we're better people if we can do that. We have to stop being so aggressive on the one hand and so thin-skinned on the other, because I find that it's both. The people who are sometimes the most aggressive are the most hurt when somebody pushes back on them in the same way. And I've always found that just treating most people in this environment fairly and hearing them out, it ends up creating a much better conversation, and most times it actually ends up bringing the temperature down. That's all I can control. I can only control the things that I put online. And hopefully, I don't know if we'll ever solve the problem of social media, but there is no question it's not a pleasant place to hang out. It's pretty bad for your mental health if you spend too much time on it.
So I want to wrap here by just asking you, what's your message to people who don't know you, to maybe the mom who's listening, who's heard of Premier Danielle Smith in the media? What do you want our listeners to know about you and you as Premier of Alberta?
It's so funny when I do an event, most of the time I will always have someone come up to me afterwards and say, oh my gosh, you're not at all the way the media depicts you. And,
yeah.
And so I think that is part of it, is that you have to look at more than one source when you hear any news information these days, and you want to be able to get your perspective from multiple sources. I prefer for people to hear long form interviews like this, because then they can judge me. There's still people who are not going to agree with me at the end of this conversation, but they'll have a better understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I do always like, though, to give advice to women in particular who are thinking of trying to get into politics and are feeling like they're not that they're not getting their ideas through. One thing I found very early on, it was good advice I was given. I went to a seminar and I enjoyed it so much. And I talked to the organizers afterwards. I said, how can I get invited back to one of these things? I said, well, we make our decisions on who gets invited back based on who had something to contribute to the conversation. So that was always important to me, to realize that if you want to be seen, you have to be heard. And I think, unfortunately, too many women in board meetings walk away from the table and they talk to their colleague afterwards with a really, really great idea. And then their colleague brings a really, really great idea up the next day, and they're the ones who get credit, not them. And then people are left feeling hurt, they're left feeling overlooked, and they're left feeling like they're not being appreciated. So my message has always been, if you want to be seen, you have to be heard. Don't be afraid to speak up. It's not easy the first times you do it. I hear that public speaking is supposed to be the second most terrifying thing that people will do. First, I think people are more, maybe actually the first most terrifying. People are more afraid of public speaking than death, I think, is one of the things that I had read. And so, but you have to get over it, really. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get and the better you get at it. And especially in this new world where so much communication happens online through mediums like this, becoming a confident public speaker will just make you feel like you can get your message across, and that people respect and value you more. So some of that that's one of the messages that I like to give. It's one of the things that has worked for me throughout my career. And if others want to follow in this pathway, that would be the advice I would give.
Well said.
All right. Well, we have a million more questions. Will you come back?
Yes, of course. Well, we'll see first. See what kind of reaction you get on social media, and if you can withstand the heat, by all means, I'll come back.
We can. You're inspiring us to withstand this heat. Oh my goodness! I want to have you back and just nerd out for a full episode about everything that you love and I love, which is the Constitution. We want to thank Premier Danielle Smith for joining us, and we appreciate you taking the time. We know you have to go and run the province, so thank you very much for taking this time with us, and we will have you back soon.
My pleasure. See you again.
We'll be right back. All right. We had the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, with us 2 seconds ago. First elected official on the podcast. What did you think, Amanda?
So I loved talking to her because I think it's a marvel to get to talk to somebody who has that position and who has such different political views than I have. And we didn't get into that because that wasn't the place. It wasn't the place for me to, argue my view versus her view. But it's a curious thing to listen to somebody who, I'll give her this, has a vision, is unafraid to fight for that vision. Yeah. We could definitely differ on whether I think that vision is right or wrong, but I do think that it's a challenging position to be in, to hold a position that is frankly in some ways so different than a large swath of the country, and have to feel like you got to put your gloves on and fight for it. So I certainly respect the fact that she has to take that position, or has elected to take that position. And I thought it was really interesting to talk to her about the political discourse, because she's certainly somebody who's been frequently accused of picking fights. And I think sometimes we don't hear that about women. So, there's something about having to stand up, fight for what you want. And again, while I disagree with a lot of her political or policy positions, I do respect the fact that she has them, she got elected on them, and she's fighting for them.
Yeah, well, as you know, for me, that was just a dream because the separation, the role of the provinces and defining that role, for me, the nerdy Politico, is so fascinating. And I talk about this on TV a lot because she really is pushing those boundaries on how we define how the powers of the provinces in Canada. And I thought it was interesting because she said, we're trying to be like Quebec. And if you look at Canada's history, Quebec has been, a real, I don't want to say thorn in our side, but they've been pushing the envelope on provincial powers for so long. And I thought that was interesting that she committed to doing the same. So I think she's a really interesting leader. I think her leadership style is very interesting. She's sitting at a table by herself as the only woman in all of Canada to be leading a province. And we've seen that in the history of Canada over and over again. I mean, there's only been a handful of women that have held that office, and that's partially why we wanted to make sure that we talked to her. But she's doing things, she's kind of like breaking the door down. She's saying, I have this role, I have this vision, I'm going to fight for the people of Alberta. And so for me, that's a really interesting and compelling narrative. I think it'll be really interesting to see where she goes with all of this. And especially, we touched on it a little bit, but if there's a change in government in Ottawa, what that will mean and what her relationship with the federal government will be like with a conservative government in power there.
Yeah. Well, how do you suspect that would play out? I'm curious about your perspective of as a conservative government. And she's really made a name for herself again about, being the one who's willing to fight. And
exactly.
Does she maintain that role no matter who's in power, or does she have to play a different game? We should ask that question. What do you think?
Well, I kind of put that to her. I said, this is really about you having these principles and wanting to push the federal government on what the role of the provinces are, what the powers that the provinces hold are, more so than having a personality in the prime minister's office. So obviously referencing whether a Trudeau government or Poilievre government. my suspicion, and she kind of tiptoed around it, but my suspicion is that regardless of who's prime minister, she's got an agenda and she's going to push that for the people of Alberta. The flip side of that is who's going to be more friendly towards that agenda. Obviously, a conservative government would probably align more with what she's trying to accomplish. So I suspect that a changing government in Ottawa would be a really interesting relationship with the province of Alberta with her at the helm.
Well, sometimes what we know about politics provincially and federally is everybody's looking for a foe, right? Because you fight the good fight and you make the headlines based on the fight. So sometimes it's a good thing to have somebody in the position federally where you do hold opposing views and it looks like you're really fighting for your province. So it will be interesting because she has a bit of that persona. It will be interesting. It would be interesting to see if there was a change in government, how she will maintain kind of this persona that she's created, being the fighter, willing to go to the wall, and whether that's truly resonating with Albertans. Which
that's an interesting question.
See until the next election, but
right,
she's also had her fair share of criticism in her own province. So
I think one of the things that I wish that I would have asked her also, but we, like, full disclosure, we didn't have a ton of time with her. She is a sitting premier, so she very kindly made time for us. But one of the things that I'd be super interested in is the NDP leadership race. So right now, there's the opposition in Alberta is the NDP. Rachael Notley stepped down as leader, and they're in a big leadership race that's coming up. I think that'll be interesting too, based on who wins that.
For sure.
How she'll position herself.
Yeah, for sure.
As leader of the UPC. We'll have her back. We'll ask her.
She's a fascinating leader to watch. Whether you agree or disagree with her views, she's definitely one to watch. And so, stay tuned. Let's find out what Danielle Smith will be up to in the coming months and the coming years. No doubt that there will be a lot of headlines.
Yes, a lot of headlines. And we are going to be talking to other women who have held the role of premier in this country over the next little while. So stay tuned for our conversation with other former premiers, because there's only one current female premier.
That's right.
In Canada. And I'm really excited for those two, and just to kind of learn from each of them and see how their experiences differ from one another.
Absolutely. I also, last word on her, I really liked her advice at the end, which was to share with women. I thought it was really interesting, the observation she made about women being around the boardroom table, having a point of view, but waiting until they left the table to discuss it with their colleagues. And I've witnessed that too. And I thought that that was a really interesting observation, and then a good piece of advice to follow, which is like, you have to be heard in order to be seen. So to state your position and to be confident in it was advice worth taking.
I'm totally that woman that doesn't say anything in the meeting and then tells my colleague.
That
spoke to me. Totally.
Surprises me. Really?
Yeah. I'm not one to put my hand up at a boardroom, but I should funnel Danielle Smith's power and leadership.
I might make sure put my hand down a little more.
And that's what makes us us. I love it. Oh my God. Okay. Well, I'm putting my hand up right now and saying thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you taking the time to tune in. If you have gotten this far and you want to leave us a review, a comment, a 5-star on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would love the feedback. We'd really appreciate that. And we will be back next week with another episode of Beyond a Ballot. We'll talk to you then.